All right, so we want to talk about green screen. Now, we've gone down this path already in Premiere, and we actually did a much better job with the sort of lame footage that I gave you of the guy running and shooting and his little fake gun. We actually did pretty well on that assignment, and I was impressed that we were able to get it to look as good as we did, even in Premiere, without all the sort of heavy lifting tools that you get in After Effects. But I want to revisit green screen. That media that we used before is still out there, but I've given you some additional media, a whole bunch of stuff that you can pull from. So if you go into the online class media, week 13 online media folder into green screen, you will see that there's a lot of footage in here. You got the original stuff we did. We've got some Avengers sort of Marvel stuff in here. Um, we've got some Blade stuff here, which is kind of cool, um, which we're going to mess with here in a minute. There's some Captain America. There's Deadpool. Some of these are stills. Some of them are moving video. But the point is, I've given you a whole bunch of stuff to play with. We're going to do a couple together, and then I'm going to let you kind of go nuts and on your own. I should also point out in there is a green screen After Effects project in here. If you want to sort of get into some more heavy lifting stuff, there may be plugins. I'm pretty sure there's plugins in there that we don't have, some optical effects, lens flares and stuff. But you can at least get in and sort of look at what a real sort of graphic artist did and see how he did it. There's also some nice notes in here that, especially if you think you're going to be shooting green screen, this would be a good resource. It kind of tells you, it reminds you how to light it, how to evenly light things and whatever. So these are just there as a reference for you. Again, I want you to walk away from this class with a box of goodies, things you can always go back to when it all of a sudden becomes relevant in your life. But just know that there is a document in there with some tips on shooting better green screen. All right. So if you started your new project in After Effects, let's start by doing a car crash from of moving video, a flying car crash of moving video from the Blade Runner 2049 or whatever, the newer Blade Runner movie. Okay, so you're going to create a new composition. You're going to go ahead and use the 1920 1080 aspect ratio. 24 frames per second is great. Make it about 10 seconds. We're not going to need all of that, but that's totally fine. Background's great. I'm going to call mine car crash. I have a couple of them, so I'm going to put a 2 at the end of mine. All right. And then we are going to go get the car crash green and crash plate. Car crash green and crash plate items. If you want to import the folders worth of stuff you downloaded, you certainly can. We don't have to cherry pick them at this stage if that's annoying. But what we want is car crash green and crash plate. I believe they are next to each other. Yep, they're both right here. Car crash green, crash plate. But if you want, you could just try to import it all. I'm sure like the document will fail because it's not going to come in, and there'll be some things that may give you error messages. But you're going to want to play with all this stuff eventually. So bring it all in if you want. All right, so I do car crash green and I drag it down into my timeline. I look at what it is and I say, oh, okay, this is inside the car. That's cool. I also notice that the first frame is kind of worthless. So I'm going to slide it over one click, one sort of frame distance over so that I don't have to look at that ugly frame because it's kind of worthless. I'm going to zoom in on my timeline a little bit using the little. And then as you see, the sort of car, as it was shot, the car jostles, dirt gets thrown on the windshield, he jerks forward, and then we run out of frames. So I'm going to put a letter N, hit the letter N to bracket off that as my last frame. That works for me. And then, yes, this is the section I care about. And the car's not really moving. It just gets thrown around and dirt gets thrown on the windshield. Nice. So the other shot that I said to bring in is crash plate. If you bring that in, put it underneath the shot of him in the car. All right. Now, if I turn off the top layer, I'm doing the eyeball, I can actually see that this shot is the shot of the camera running at the ground. And although it never actually hits the ground, it gets close enough that if dirt were to overtake the windshield, it would look believable. So there's some extra frames in here, but if you just line them both up at the beginning, it's going to work perfectly fine for our example. So I'm going to hit the eyeball again over here to turn it back on so that I now have car crash green on top. The thing that has the green element I want to key out is on top, and then the crash plate is underneath. All right. Now, the effect I want to do to car crash green, we want to apply it to the layer that has in it. Okay. That's where we want to apply the effect. And if you go to your effects and presets section on the right hand of your window over here, you can do a search. Right? You can do a search for key, K-E, K-I. And there's a whole bunch of keys that come up. I might even have some because of third-party stuff that you don't. But the one we want to use is key light. All right, key light is the one that is most commonly used. It doesn't mean you can't do some of this with other keys. This is the one that's most commonly used. And if I touched the car crash green last, then of course I can double click it and it will apply it, or you can drag it over and make sure that you're dropping it on the right thing. When I do that, the effects control window pops up. If it doesn't, you can switch over to it and you'll see that yes, that effect has now been added to the car crash green layer. So what do I need to do? Well, I need to tell it what my screen color is. All right, so there's a little eyedropper here. I'm going to click on it, and now I can go over and say, yep, this green right in here is essentially what I want to remove. And as soon as I click it, everything disappears. Now, it's a little misleading because our background plate has some green. So don't be fooled by this green that you do see. As I go forward, you'll notice that's actually in the shot. But it's not something we need to eliminate, at least not for this example, because we're doing a very, very basic example. But as you see, the shots time out the way they should. We see them start to crash, we get to see them close to the ground, dirt overtakes the lens, and it's a pretty believable thing. You can't see it because the frame rate's so terrible, but when I play it, it's a reasonably believable car crash. Now, the only thing that's stuck when I do play it is that key. Although it looks pretty good up here, the reality is I have some imperfections here. Now, I don't mind a little bit of reflection off, sort of allowed for it, but you can still see it. It's not terrible. But what I do mind is the fact that some of my background plate is going up on the headrest. Yours may be doing the same thing. So how do we refine the key once we've actually sort of established the basic green? Well, I don't know how to tell you to do it other than to play with it, because the reality is I don't do it every day, and I would be willing to bet, even when I ask some of the people that I know that do it a lot, they just sort of start playing with sliders. So I'm going to go to the screen matte area over here on the left, and I am going to uncollapse it so that I can see the options that are here. All right. So there are some options here under screen matte that I can start making adjustments to. So if I adjust the clip black, for example, that is going to basically say, in reference to what is green, how dark is the stuff that qualifies as black. So as I start sliding it, you will notice that it in fact changes my key quite a bit. I kind of lost that nice reflection on the inside of the windshield, but it didn't really fix my headrest problem. If anything, it made it worse. And if I go too far, oh, it's completely terrible. So I'm going to say, yep, clip black is probably white. Well, it was already at 100. I can't go any higher than that. But as I start going to the left, the first thing that happens in my world is that the headrest problem goes away. If I go too far, too much goes away, and I start to lose my good-looking window stuff. So I'm going to find a happy medium in between the two to where my headrest is no longer a problem, but I haven't gone so far as to screw up my windshield. Pretty cool. In my example, it was about a clip white level 80 that actually got this key looking pretty good. And now as I scroll through it, I can tell that the headrest is really clean. Everything's pretty good. Now, I do have kind of a weird When you're doing a key, the most common thing you might want to mess with is being able to choke the image a little bit, which literally means, oh, I'm getting like a halo around it. It's sort of making sense of the key, but it's maybe not doing as clean a job as I want around the edges of things. So if you go to the screen, shrink, and grow, you can expand it and it will be a little bit bigger and include things outside of what it thinks is the edge. And if you go into the negatives, it will choke it back. Literally, in some plugins, they refer to it as choking the key. But as you can see, I'm really screwing my thing up to go that far. I've lost the edge of his face. I've lost the window, edge of the window frame. So you can overdo it, but that's good when you're just trying to get a sense of what it looks like. So find a setting that you like and live with it. All right. You can adjust screen softness, which will basically feather the edges, which sometimes makes what was a very believable, nice looking key look crappy and soft. But sometimes if you're dealing with like hair, wispy hair, that can be the right thing to do. It gives you a smoother look. Okay. So even though in the sort of matte world and masking, we were very used to sort of doing an edge blur to make it look better, it doesn't always work with a green screen. All right. It isn't always what you want, I guess is what I should say. All right. So play with these until you get it looking the way you want. And then when you're all good, you can call it a day. All right. So that was a very basic key. We didn't have to do a lot to make this be believable. The fact that they shook the car helps because it kind of gives us a more believable dynamic. But let's do something that needs work where we don't have as clean of a thing to work with. So let's make a new composition. And I am going to call this one over the shoulder blade, which is kind of dumb, but you'll see why I'm calling it that. All right. And then we are going to go get two elements. We're going to get Blade Runner 2 and Blade 2. These are two still images. Blade Runner 2 and Blade 2. Here's Blade 2, and here's Blade Runner 2. All right, so my two elements are this dude standing there with a big green tarp that he's looking off into, and then also the background that we wish we saw in the world where he is standing. It's imperfect because this has part of his body composited into it, which is kind of weird, but it's not actually going to screw us up in this example. Now, I just said before, let's put the green screen element on top. It tends to be more the way it wants to work. You're basically saying remove the green and let me see what's underneath. All right. That makes more sense to me. So there are ways with inverse and stuff to get it to work a different way, but this is the way I would say is the logical way to do it. All right. So if Blade Runner 2 is on top, which should be this image of him staring off into green, and Blade 2 is underneath, which is the world we want to sort of put him in, then you can go get our favorite green screen plugin, Keylight, drag it in, drop it on the top of that, or double click it, whichever makes more sense to you. But the key is put it on the track with the green in it, which is this. And then I'm going to do the same trick. I'm going to get the little eyedropper and I'm going to hit the green. And then boom, now I can sort of see the world he's in. But I've deliberately chosen this example because it is imperfect, right? We have kind of a problem here. We can still see the fact that this tarp was put on this stand and is being held up. We need to get rid of some of that stuff. So we've got a beautiful key happening. The hard part of making him be world, that's been accomplished. That's why they did it the way they did. They said that we just need green in this one area so we can get a good key. We can mask out the rest. And that's what we're going to have to do in this example. All right. So I am going to make this screen a little smaller in here. I have set to fit, which is hitting at about 50% for me. So I'm going to take it down to 33 so I have a little bit of a margin around here to play with. We've done this before. This is going to feel very familiar. Kinds of stuff we did in Premiere to do lighting effects. We're going to create a mask. Now I have a choice. I can either mask what I want to leave or I can mask away the things that are imperfect. It's going to be a little weirder to mask away what is imperfect, but I think it's more universally understandable that way. So do it that way. So with your top track still selected or layer, we're going to go to the pen tool. All right, we're just going to select it so we can draw a mask. And I'm going to start outside of the image, and I'm basically going to create a shape, one shape. We have basically two problems in this shot, right? We have this region here on the left-hand side where I can see the original sky and I can see this pole. That would be one problem, but then I have one more problem over here because I have the same general problem happening here too. I have tried to do a mask and then a second mask, and I couldn't get it to work. I can't tell you confidently that it can't happen, but when we do masking for lighting effects in Premiere to do like color correction and fake lights and stuff, I taught you to do it as one big shape that connected. And so we're just going to do it that way. It's a technique we've already used, so it shouldn't be that groundbreaking to do it in this example. So what do I mean by that? Well, I'm going to actually draw a shape that I know is going to include this stuff that is not right. And I'm going to connect it with the second shape, which is the one that's going over here and fixing and remedying this problem. But instead of connecting it here, well, actually, I guess I could. I could connect it there and invert it. But let's just make it one big giant shape. And then boom, it did the exact opposite of what I wanted. What do we do when that happens? We find the invert mask. So I'm going to open up and dig into the masks. I think I could have hit the letter M as well. But I'm just opening the mask controls and I'm going to where I have an inverted option and I hit invert and then boom, it worked. So it didn't matter so much over here. This is a junk pile to junk pile sort of mask. But if I move one of these points, which I'm going to click off the pen tool over to just the regular pointer tool, click into nothing, click back. Nope, not going to do that. Click, click, clicking on too much stuff. Maybe I do want to leave the pen tool on. Sorry. Here we go. Mask one. Click on this. I don't want to click into nothing because it starts making a new mask. That's not what I want. Okay. All right, if I click to nothing and then go back and start dragging, it will let me. So as you can see, there's a bit of a different the pile of junk in the original and the pile of junk in this one. So I might want to make this as close to him as I can get it so that I'm getting a nice smooth transition. Over here, I had to deal with this box because what you don't realize is my background plate, the box isn't there. Problem. So I had to draw the dots around the box to make sure that I didn't exclude the box. Right? But you could harsh sort of drop off here. If I move this point, you'll definitely see it. All right. So what I may need to do is I may need to move the ones I have to make this look a little bit better. Now it doesn't look so jacked up and everything's a little bit more believable. Now that's pretty good. If I click on nothing down here and it goes away, I kind of buy that. I kind of believe that he's staring off to. There's really only one imperfection left, and that is this weird shadow that is coming from the original tarp. If I turn off the key, you can really see that this tarp is jacked up, right? It's actually casting a shadow down here or it's wrinkled down there and it looks bad. And then in my composite, I don't have that. So how do I fix it? Well, if I go back to my do put on the keyframing pen again, I can add some points down here that will allow me to create some new shapes along my line. All right, so if I actually if I actually do this, I now have something I can bring up here. Notice once I come up here, that little shadow goes away. and it refines the look and feel of my thing. That's, I think it's good to know, oh, what if I miss something and I want to go back? Well, you can put points back in like I just did, and I made them curvy and I didn't intend it, so I'm fixing that. All right. So yes, I can sort of undo the fact that we're bendy and I didn't want them to be bendy. All right, so now my shadow's gone. And again, even if I went way up here, it's basically the same composite, right? It looks pretty good. But I'm trying to hide that underneath. Do I see that? That's the key of why I went to the trouble to do that. And now if I click and make the lines go away, this looks 1,000 times better. There's no giveaway at all that this is an effect or any kind of weird, unexplainable shadows. Everything looks really good. Now, if he's walking, we'd have to move that mask, right? But that's the same skills that I taught you when we did the van driving by, right? We would go frame by frame and make sure that the edges of these sort of flow with him. And given that the two background plate and the foreground plate are so similar, it probably doesn't even have to be very perfect. You just have to get it pretty close so that if he strays too far, you're good. But I'm betting on a shot like this, it's not going to move that much. We could have a scene where the camera pushes towards this, just knowing the nature of the drama of why you would shoot this. It might push towards this. You might have to move, but we know how to move a mask. It's a lot of trouble. We're dealing with a still here, so there's no reason to do it. But I just wanted to show you, look, you know how to take it further if this was a moving target. All right. So pretty good. But we've done two. We did a car crash, which by the way, when I did my car crash, the fact that the background plate had some green in it kind of bugged me. So I actually spent a little more time on it and I replaced what was green with sky from another shot. So I actually put, where is it? This shot, I had to zoom it way the heck in, but this little bit of sky I filled in. So I did a key inside the plate. So basically we started with this, only it was green. I filled in that green with sky and I rekeyed it into the car. And then now I at least don't have green in that shot, and it's something based on real life. It's solution, but it does look better than seeing green screen in the shot. Especially if this was a quick cut, the chances of you noticing it are very thin. But just so you know, it's a double green screen going on, a green screen going on in the background element and in the foreground, and it worked just fine. It didn't take too long, but I just wanted you to see you can do that. All right. So let's look at some other keys. That was that one. That was that one. So here's one I did, and I'm not going to make you do it, but I want you to see it. I had a very simple key. I took these two elements. One was the background, which was space, and I had it just push a little bit from right to left or left to right. I can't tell my left from my right. So it just drifts over a little bit, not real complicated, simple position change, right? If I do U for the keyframes, I was playing with a flare on it. It's not there anymore. I don't know why those are still there. Don't worry about that. The point is under positioning. Yes, under positioning, I have two keyframes. This keyframe, this keyframe. Not tricky, right? So then Robert Downey Jr. inside the ship, and I put it over the top. And of course, it's normally green. It's a green screen, so I just sampled the green and it replaced it. And then I did a little bit of a move on this as well. So it too, if I go into that track and hit P for position, you'll see that there are only two keyframes in that as well, here and here. So I had to enlarge it a little bit to allow it to move because I think it was actually 1920, 1080. You to see the margin over here. So I zoomed it in a smidge or scaled it in a smidge and then moved it over at a slightly different speed. And it wasn't a big deal. I had both elements on. I just sort of played it together and went, oh, how I like the fact that one's moving at a different speed. It gives it a more believable sort of 3D illusion. All right, not super hard. Then I added an adjustment layer. just by going into layer, new adjustment layer, which means I had sort of a transparent thing layer over the top of that. And what did I do in there? Well, let's look at keyframes by hitting the letter U. You can see all the keyframes that I set, and there aren't many, but all I did was add a lens flare effect. Right? So if you go to your effects and presets over on the right-hand side and you search for flare, I have some third-party ones you don't, I know that for sure, but there under generate is lens flare. So I added it to the adjustment layer, and then there is a control called flare center that basically allows you to move it around. So I set a keyframe with the flare over here, just hitting the edge of the frame of the ship's window, and then another one at the end, which put it out here so it drifted a little bit. So I just have two keyframes under the flare center controls, which is basically the position of your flare. And then just to be a little tricky, I played with the brightness of the flare. So as I looked at it, it looked like it was coming out from behind the metal frame here. So I basically took it from, it looks like it's at 53% brightness to 100% brightness by the time it would have had time to get around the metal there. And that's all I did. It gives you that illusion, that little extra something that says, oh, that's really a place. And those things are really there. And the camera's capturing this light coming from behind the ship. And when it flares up, you can see it. And because it's on an adjustment layer, that first time I did it just on the background. And the problem was my flare wasn't passing in front of the ship, right? It was only applied to space. That sucked. So I stopped doing that and I just went and did it just as an adjustment layer so it would affect both items. This ring is blocking both the foreground element, which is its own layer, and the background element as well. All right. So I don't think you have to do that to understand it. It's pretty straightforward, but these are the kinds of things we do to sort of muck up the image so that it looks more believable. All right. So in the shots that I gave you, we have a shot of a biker, and you can put them on different backgrounds. This is him sitting in front of blowing palm trees. But we also have a composite that was included in that folder that was done by a real graphic artist, not by me. And he took the two elements and put them together and did a little title thing. He also has a flare at the bottom that sort of motivates the believability that he has a real light on the front of the motorcycle that is fired up. All right. So why am I showing you all of this? Well, because your assignment this week is to actually find a couple of elements in all the media that I gave you and build an interesting key. All right. Another example that I'll give is this Black Widow clip. The foreground, she's on green screen, not super exciting. All right. And then there's background element of this of New York that I put behind her. The thing is, the raw footage of her is very wiggly. So if I go to Black Widow and I play it out here, where we can watch it in a more pure form, then you will see that this is handheld. Right? And then she fires, and thankfully real flares, there are real flares that come on off the end of the gun, but it's real sort of steady handheld footage. So if you take the background plate, I use this, which is actually a still from video, because you can see that there's things blowing up and burning and all of that. But it doesn't really matter because by the time you combine them, they're blocked by all this stuff. So you can't really tell. So the next problem I had was, well, you got this shaky green screen footage, right? So I went and I motion tracked this shot so that I then could marry the back to the motion tracked that element. So the background would move as if it's handheld along with the foreground. All right. So I just picked a high contrast area in the image, created the motion tracking data, applied it to a null, right? Just like we learned before. And then I tracked with it the background element, which I think I had to zoom in a smidge because it didn't have quite the resolution I needed. And then I put a title on it just for fun. And then once I created the title, I connected it to the null as well. So it moves along with it. So it all feels very handheld and it all works very smoothly. All right. Then I add smoke. So there's a little bit of smoke in here that I've added as its own layer. And then it was blocking her face a little bit too much. So I went into my smoke and I created a little bit of a mask on it, feathered it, and made sure that basically the smoke didn't cover her face. But you can't really tell that when you watch the finished piece. All right. But I had to sort of choke the key because her hair is red against the green and it is not perfect as I would like it to be. So your assignment is to build something kind of like this out of all the ingredients that I gave you. I gave you get all these different, find a couple things that you like, but you can't do just kind of like my space example. You can't just go, oh, I threw this in and I threw this background and I did the eyedropper and the green went away and I'm done. No, give me something to, in addition to just the key, to make it more visually appealing slash believable. You want to do a lens flare, do a lens flare. You want to motion track it because it's a handheld shot, motion track it. You want to add some particles, some dust. If you dig back into the set 1 and set 2 media that I gave you, that's also out there for you to download if you don't already have it. There's powder, dust, film scratches, all kinds of stuff out there that you could use to make it more optically pleasing. All right. So I want to give me more than just 2 layers. Give me some other stuff, some other magic that makes it believable. All right. But that's it. Most of the clips are like 4 or 5 seconds. There's not much to it. This was another comp that I made that I'm just showing you as an example. There's this footage of this girl on a green screen. Her hair's blowing. I put her into this shot and I color matched her skin because she was lit very white and this was a very golden environment. And then just to be tricky, I added a sunshine element in there and a lens flare. And in the end, it's pretty good. And then I think I put some film scratches on it, which you probably can't see through WebEx, but there are some film scratches that sort of tie it all together and make it a believable comp. I don't expect anything that you build is going to be perfect. I've given you very imperfect stuff, but do the best you can to give me a good looking green screen from the ingredients I gave you. And obviously, if you have something else in mind that you've seen on the web, you want to pull it in. I just need a grade when I know it's stuff that I gave you and I know it's limited as to what you can do with it. All right. But, this footage of her is very compressed. So it is kind of like chunky when the key isn't perfect, it looks very squared, and that's because it's compressed. So it's another thing to keep in mind if you're shooting green screen. You want as little compression on your source image as you can possibly give it, because it may do the green key decently, but the imperfections will be blocky looking instead of wispy and real looking. So it's something to know about. Right? I did mask her out a little bit because some of the wisps were appearing and disappearing outside of the mask and it looked bad. So I just cropped a rough soft edge mask around her so that any hairs that showed up or try to show up out here won't even show up. So they're only wispy close to her head. Just another way I did to sort of solve the problem. All right, so I will stick around, and if you have any questions, feel free to ask. I'm going to stop recording. Good luck.